All right, guys, welcome back to another week of science class. So we're going to kind of start off, continuing with chemistry, but we're going to talk about how these molecules, we're kind of slowly building, right? We started with the elements, the atoms, the basics. Then we put those atoms together, we got molecules. Now, what happens when we rearrange molecules? What happens when those molecules come in contact with each other? And that's what we're talking about when it comes to chemical reactions. So, chemical reactions are going to be when you have reactants, which are going to be molecules, that are coming together to form something different in terms of products. So you get some other molecule gets rearranged. And the best examples that I can think of when it comes to chemical reactions occur in cooking. So I'm going to start off with one that I've seen all over social media. Like, I don't know if you guys see it or if it's just like millennials like me that are posting it or other people. I don't know. But this whole coffee trend where basically the idea is you take instant coffee, you take hot water, and you take sugar, and you just whip it like forever, or you use an electric mixer, I think would be a little bit quicker. And it forms this kind of foam that you can see in the picture there. So it forms this foam that you can see. If I can get my pen to work, let's see. Pen. Look, the green light is on, so it should work, right? Oh, it works. Awesome. Okay, so this is the picture here, and it's like this foamy coffee thing. Basically, you have milk here, and then you make this coffee foam, and I think people are doing it because it's kind of, you don't need a lot of ingredients for it, but they call it, I think it's called I'm gonna probably mess this up, Dalgona coffee or something like that. Either way, it's been kind of all the rage. I've seen like everybody and their brother post this on Instagram. But anyways, that's what I'm here for, helping you with your Instagram and your TikTok through science. But anyways, you have your coffee here. And basically, let's talk about the chemical reaction that's happening there. So you need coffee, instant coffee. You also need water and sugar, right? So all those things together, you put them in separately, and then you get out of it, you get this foam, this coffee foam that stays like that. And each one of those ingredients has a specific role. The water gets absorbed into the instant coffee to make it larger. It basically makes the coffee instead of just powder. Then you have your sugar, which actually retains the shape of that foam. So you can actually, fun facts, you can make a foam if you just had the coffee and water, but that foam actually won't stay very long because the sugar is what allows it to keep that shape for a little bit longer because it traps the air bubbles inside. So that's the chemical reaction. Now, some specific terms that you'll want to make sure you know. Okay, so some important terms that you need to know as we're talking about reactions. So the two main ones are going to be reactants and products. So reactants are what you are putting into the reaction. So in other words, what are you mixing together in your bowl, in your ingredients for whatever you're cooking, whatever you're making, what are you putting into that? Whereas the products are what I get out of it. So for example, in the last one, I put in the sugar, I put in the coffee, and I put in the water. The product, what I got out of it, was the foam. And when we see this, and you saw me draw a little reaction on there as well, you see arrows, and those arrows mean yields. It means the reaction goes on and I get to my products. So it bridges the gap between our reactants and our products. So let's look at this really quickly. Let me give you another example from life science or biology. You might remember this, and that is the equation for photosynthesis, right? And it is the same exact thing for what happens basically in our mitochondria. Do the same thing in reverse, I guess is what I was going to say. So the point of photosynthesis is to take energy from the sun and to make it into a sugar. We're reconfiguring all these things out. So the things that you need for photosynthesis, you need carbon dioxide, okay? So CO2, like that. Then you get out of it, you need a couple more things. You need water. And you need light. So I'm going to write light as a reactant here, but it's actually something a little bit different that we'll talk about later. So you get something like this. These are our 3 reactants on this side. So our reactants are always going to be to the left of the arrow, okay? So we're always going to draw our reactants on the left-hand side. Then the products are going to go on the other side. So when we put all of these things into the little chloroplast, into those little cells, those plant cells, what are they going to do? They're going to mix up all of those atoms. They're going to break them down and recreate bonds. And we call those the products, what we get out of it, right? So the products of photosynthesis that are really important for us are going to be oxygen that we breathe in, and we also get out some sugar. That sugar is in the form of glucose. Now, the chemical formula for glucose is C6H12O6, okay? So that's how you set up equations. Now, this is not a balanced equation. We aren't quite done with this. And we'll get more into balancing equations later, because eventually, if you remember back to, I don't know, like the first quarter, we were talking about nothing's created nor destroyed when it comes to matter and when it comes to energy. So all of these things that we put in, we have to get something out that kind of matches it. So if we have how many atoms on the right-hand side? We have 2 atoms from oxygen, and then over from glucose, we have 24. Whereas over here, the atoms, you have 3 from carbon dioxide, and you have 3 from water. You can't get 26 atoms magically from nowhere. So instead, you're going to have to change and put numbers in front of these. We'll get more on that later. I don't want to add that on yet, but for those of you guys that are a little ahead of the game and want to start thinking about that, that will be something that you'll have to do eventually. So right now, just basics. What's the skeleton of an equation? So let's talk about another cooking thing, because that's kind of a good kind of intro into reactions, is to talk about cooking. And everybody's kind of cooking right now anyway. So one of the most important reactions when it comes to cooking is called the Maillard reaction. And it's spelled like this, French there. And if you look up any kind of cooking, anything, and you want to get into the science of it, they'll probably talk about this reaction. If you want to learn more about cooking science, by the way, I highly recommend the Food Lab. It's great. Basically, they have a website. They also have a book. It's written by this guy who used to be a scientist, but actually kind of changed into more of a cooking career. And now he does a lot of cool experiments with cooking. And I think he has YouTube videos and things like that. But anyways, the Maillard reaction happens when anything is going to be browned or baked in a way that sugars and proteins are coming into contact with each other. You do it if you are making toast. You are doing it if you are making pancakes. You do it if you're browning any kind of meat. So it also is responsible for a lot of the aromas that cooking creates, because what happens in the Maillard reaction is you take your base elements, you take your reactants. So you need proteins for this to occur in the form of amino acids. So amino acids are basically building blocks of proteins. It's kind of, we'll talk a little bit more about what some of these specific molecules are like a little bit later on this week. But you have proteins, and then you also have sugars. Sugars are carbohydrates, and so you need those sugars like glucose, sucrose, even lactose, all of those things. Any of the oses, those are all sugars. So when you have those things in combination with each other, basically those molecules get rearranged and they create some of the more complex things that we associate with food, like aromas, the smell of cookies baking, or the taste. All of these things happen because of the Maillard reaction, which is actually kind of cool. It's kind of complex. So here's another example of that same reaction. You see, basically, these are kind of more drawings of what these chemicals would look like, but it's the same idea, right? You have your sugar here and you have your protein here. And when you add things called catalysts, which we'll talk a little bit more about, or in the presence of heat, you get this reaction that happens that causes these to come together and get rearranged into a completely different kind of molecule. That's the Maillard reaction in general. It's actually a lot of reactions that are happening. It's breaking down these molecules and building things, kind of like Legos. If you ever, like normal Legos, you build things up, but you have to break down other things sometimes to get there. So that's the main idea here. Okay guys, so the last thing that I want to talk about for today's video is the idea of endothermic and exothermic reaction. So you guys remember all the way back with energy, right? That wasn't super long ago. So that idea we are talking about heat, right? So thermal energy, we're talking about what is happening with heat. Is it gaining or losing thermal energy? So exothermic reaction, heat, which we really should say thermal energy. Remember, that's really what we should say instead of heat. So thermal energy is released from a reaction, whereas endothermic, heat is absorbed. So exo means to exit, endo means to go into. So you have two different kinds of reactions that you can have that everything is going to be classified as. So let's start exothermic here would be something like that. So examples of exothermic reactions are going to be things like combustion, right? Things that are going to release energy to the outside world. So it's really easy to see if you have something that is burning in the presence of oxygen because it's giving off both light and heat in the terms of fire. So that one's a little bit easier to see and measure when it's really, really getting going. But another one that happens every single day inside of your cells is respiration. So when you breathe in and you eat, you are participating in an exothermic reaction because what's happening there is the cells are taking that glucose, that sugar in what you're eating, and basically breaking it down to release energy to the rest of the cell. And then it uses that energy for other things that are going to be really important. So thermal energy, it's going to be released to the environment. Endothermic reaction is going to be kind of like the ice pack. Instead, heat is absorbed from a reaction. So think about what you use an ice pack for. For example, if you get injured, you put, let's say that I'm going to draw, this is somebody's arm. I think they might have too many fingers. I'm just going to erase that. That looks weird. Let's try again. I'm not an artist, people. This is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that's a hand. Let's say that I get injured. Injury. Okay, what do I do with that? I put an ice pack on it. So I take an ice pack and I put the ice pack on it. And what's happening there is I'm taking some of where I get burned, let's say. Maybe a burn's a better way because let's say it gets really hot or I get sunburned or something like that, and I want to cool off. So what's happening is this ice pack is absorbing the energy given off from that burn, right? It's absorbing that energy, and eventually over time, that ice pack is going to get warmer. So it's absorbing the heat, and it's the same thing that happens when we sweat. So when we get really, when we're like exercising and our body gets too hot, basically we start sweating, right? This is not a new information, but what sweat actually does is it absorbs some of that heat, some of that thermal energy that you're producing. And then when it evaporates, that basically it leaves you a little bit cooler because some of that thermal energy has left the system. They're not really left, it's just gone out. So anyways, I hope that makes sense. That's exothermic and endothermic reactions. We'll talk a little bit more about those as we go throughout the rest of this next couple weeks or so. But these are some starting terms, some starting introduction into chemical reactions. So I hope you learned stuff, and let me know, as always, if you have questions, comments, concerns. Don't forget to take notes and all of that good stuff. All right, bye guys.